My mother-in-law tossed my coat at me during Christmas dinner, told me I didn't belong. Everyone watched in silence. Not one person defended me. 3 months later, the bank called her about missed payments. That's when she learned whose name was really on her mortgage. The look on her face when I walked into the mediation meeting? Priceless. Now she calls me the smart one. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany grandfather clock in the corner of the dining room struck 7 p.m. just as Helen Blackwood rose from her seat, napkin clutched in her white-knuckled fist. The Christmas turkey lay half-carved on the antique serving platter, as everyone's attention shifted to my mother-in-law's sudden movement. The conversation about holiday vacation plans died instantly. "I think it's time you left, Olivia," she announced, her voice carrying that unique blend of southern sweetness and steel that had intimidated me from the day we'd met. "This is a family dinner, and honestly, I'm not sure you qualify anymore." The table fell silent. 12 pairs of eyes darted between us. My husband Michael's gaze fixed firmly on his plate, refusing to meet mine. I felt the blood drain from my face as the weight of 20 years of trying to please this woman crashed down around me. "Mom," Michael finally mumbled, but offered nothing more. No defense, no objection. I glanced at the Christmas tree in the corner, adorned with ornaments I'd gifted the family over the years, the needlepoint stockings hanging from the mantel that I'd hand-stitched, the cranberry sauce made from my grandmother's recipe. All these pieces of myself I'd woven into their family traditions, now apparently worthless. "I don't understand," I said, though the truth was beginning to dawn with painful clarity. "What's happening here?" Helen's smile tightened as she retrieved my coat from the hall closet, returning to toss it unceremoniously across the table, knocking over Michael's wineglass. The Cabernet spread across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain. "What's happening is that my son has finally told us about your arrangement, about how you've been controlling the finances, making him account for every penny while you build your little empire. How convenient that your name is on everything while he works himself to exhaustion." I looked at Michael in disbelief. After 15 years of marriage, after everything we'd built together, he'd rewritten our story to paint me as the villain. To his family, no less. The family I'd bent over backward to please for a decade and a half. "Michael, that's not—" I began, but Helen cut me off. "He showed us the accounts, dear. How you've structured everything. Very clever. But he's a Blackwood, and Blackwoods take care of their own. We've advised him to speak with our attorney. Irwin is the best divorce lawyer in Charleston." The rest of the family shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one contradicted her. Not Michael's father, Thomas, who'd once told me I was the best thing that had happened to his son. Not his sister Caroline, whose wedding I'd helped plan. Not even his cousin James, who'd come to me for help financing his small business startup just last year. I stood on shaking legs, suddenly aware of how alone I truly was in this room full of people who had claimed to be my family. 15 Christmases, 15 birthdays, 15 anniversaries, all seemingly erased in this single moment of betrayal. "And Michael?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Is this what you want?" He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger or conviction, but something worse. Weakness. "I just think we need some space, Liv. You've been a lot lately, with the promotion and everything. Mom's right. I feel like I'm just a passenger in my own life." The promotion, of course. 3 months ago, I'd been named CFO at Meridian Financial, making me the youngest female executive in the company's history, and out-earning my husband for the first time in our marriage. The promotion he'd celebrated with champagne and proud social media posts. The promotion that had apparently threatened the Blackwood family order more than I'd realized. I slipped my coat on with as much dignity as I could muster, aware of every eye on me, every judgment being made. As I reached for my purse, Helen spoke again. "You can keep the gifts you brought, of course. We're not monsters." The stack of carefully wrapped presents under the tree. Hours spent selecting just the right things for each family member. The custom fishing lures for Thomas. The first edition book of poetry for Caroline's collection. The antique brooch I'd found for Helen herself. An olive branch after a year of increasing tension. "Keep them," I said quietly. "Consider them parting gifts." As I walked toward the door, Helen's voice followed me. "We're not surprised, you know. My family always said a girl from your background would never truly understand how things work in families like ours." My background, the housing projects on the east side of town, the single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to put me through college, the scholarship that had taken me to the prestigious university where I'd met Michael, the years of careful saving, investing, and planning that had built the life we now shared. The life he was apparently ashamed of. I paused at the door, one hand on the knob. "You're right about one thing, Helen. I never did understand how families like yours work. I thought they were built on love and loyalty. Clearly, I was mistaken." The cold December air hit me like a physical blow as I stepped onto the porch. Christmas lights twinkled along the gutters of their historical Charleston home, the home they were so proud of, with its listing in architectural digests and feature on last year's historical home tour. The home they didn't actually own outright, though none of them knew that particular detail. Not even Michael knew everything. He'd been happy to let me handle the boring financial stuff, as he called it. Happy to enjoy the benefits of my financial acumen without understanding the structures I'd created, structures that were about to become very, very relevant. Because what Helen Blackwood didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 3 years ago, when Thomas had faced potential bankruptcy after a bad investment, I had been the one to save their precious family home. I'd created a holding company that purchased their mortgage from the bank, restructuring the terms to something they could manage. I'd done it anonymously, through one of my investment vehicles, telling Michael only that I'd found a solution through my financial connections. Helen had accepted the miracle without question, too relieved to maintain appearances to look too closely at their savior. She'd even thanked me for whatever strings you pulled at that bank of yours to help them keep the house. The irony would have been amusing if I wasn't sitting in my car sobbing on Christmas night. Marriage imploding, family lost, entirely alone except for the knowledge that I wasn't quite as powerless as they believed. I drove through the historic district in a daze, passing by the holiday decorations and families visible through warm lit windows. Families nothing like the one I'd just left. I ended up at the Battery, parking along the seawall where Michael and I had walked on our first date, the Charleston harbor stretching out before me, dark and vast in the winter night. My phone buzzed repeatedly, notifications from the family group chat I was still part of. I read them with increasing disbelief. Caroline. That was awkward, but honestly overdue. She never really fit in. James. Remember Thanksgiving when she tried to explain Bitcoin to Dad? So cringe. Helen. I'm just glad Michael finally saw reason. We'll find him someone suitable next time. And then, most painfully, Michael himself. Thanks for understanding, everyone. It's been hard, but Mom helped me see the situation clearly. Staying at the house tonight could use the support. The house. Their house. The house that technically belonged to Coastal Peninsula Investments, LLC. My company. I shut off my phone and stared out at the water, the familiar Charleston skyline reflecting on its surface. 15 years of my life had just shattered, but as the shock began to fade, something else took its place. A cold clarity I'd never experienced before. The financial strategist in me, the one who'd climbed from poverty to the C-suite through discipline and calculation, began to assess the situation with surprising detachment. Michael wanted a divorce? Fine. Helen thought I was controlling the finances. She had no idea. I reached into my purse for my emergency stash of tissues, but my fingers found something else. The small velvet box containing the gift I'd planned to give Michael privately later that night. Inside was the deed to the lakefront property in the mountains he'd been dreaming about for years. I'd finally saved enough to buy it outright, planning to tell him we could build the vacation home he'd always wanted. I snapped the box shut and tossed it onto the passenger seat. That dream was dead now, but others would take its place. By the time the sun rose on December 26th, I had stopped crying. I'd checked into the Charleston Place Hotel, ordered room service, and opened my laptop. By morning, I'd outlined a comprehensive strategy for what came next. Not just survival. I was well beyond mere survival at this point in my life, but a complete recalibration. The woman who checked into that hotel on Christmas night was a people-pleaser who'd spent 15 years trying to earn the approval of a family that would never truly accept her. The woman who checked out the next morning was someone else entirely. The first call I made was to Erwin Chambers. Yes, the same divorce attorney Helen had mentioned. Not because I wanted to beat them to him, but because Erwin had been my personal attorney for years, handling all my business matters and private investments. Helen had no idea that her recommended lawyer was actually on my payroll. "Olivia?" he answered, sounding surprised. "Merry Christmas. Is everything all right?" "Not exactly," I replied, sliding into the driver's seat of my car. "I need you to block off some time today. There are some matters we need to discuss regarding the Blackwood family home and my marriage." There was a pause on the line. "Ah," he said finally, understanding immediately. Erwin was nothing if not quick. "I see. I'll clear my afternoon. And Olivia? I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. This was always going to happen eventually. I just didn't see it clearly until now. As I navigated morning traffic toward my office downtown, I realized something that made me laugh out loud in the car, a slightly unhinged sound that startled even me. For all Helen's condescension about my background, she'd never bothered to understand what that background had actually given me. An education in survival, in identifying threats before they materialized, in never leaving myself vulnerable. She thought coming from money meant she was smarter, more strategic. But growing up without it had taught me never to take financial security for granted. And that was a lesson the Blackwoods were about to learn the hard way. Their perfect Christmas dinner had ended with them throwing me out into the cold, believing they held all the power. They had no idea that in 3 months, when the bank sent notice of their missed mortgage payment, a payment they'd struggled to make without my income contributing to the family finances, they would discover exactly who held the real power in this situation. And I would be ready. My phone rang again, Michael this time, not the group chat. I connected it to the car's Bluetooth. "Liv," he started, his voice carrying that placating tone he used when he thought I was being emotional. "I think we need to talk about last night. Mom was out of line with how she handled things, but you have to admit there's some truth to what she said. You've changed since the promotion. You're not the same person I married." I pulled up to a stoplight and watched a family crossing the street, a little girl in a new Christmas coat holding her father's hand. "You're right," I said calmly. "I'm not the same person you married. That person thought she needed to make herself smaller to fit into your family. That person is gone." "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about," he sighed. "Everything has to be a battle with you now. There was a time when you would have tried to understand my perspective." The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator. "And there was a time when you would have defended me to your family," I replied. "Listen carefully, Michael. I'll have Erwin draw up preliminary divorce papers. You can stay in the house for now. We both know you can't afford an apartment on your teacher's salary without my contribution. But understand this. I helped build my mother up from nothing. I put myself through college. I worked my way from intern to CFO through sheer determination. If you and your family think I'm going to roll over and let you rewrite our story to make me the villain, you have severely underestimated what I'm capable of. Are you threatening me? He asked, incredulous. No, I answered truthfully. I'm setting expectations. Merry Christmas, Michael. I disconnected the call as I pulled into the parking garage of my office building. It was technically a holiday, but I knew the space would be empty, giving me the quiet I needed to fully formulate my plan. As the CFO, I had access 24/7, and right now, I needed the resources only available there. The security guard looked surprised to see me. Ms. Reynolds? Didn't expect anyone today. I managed a smile. Just need to handle a few things, Curtis. Shouldn't be long. Family kick you out already? He joked, then immediately looked mortified. Sorry, bad joke. My wife says I need to think before I speak. The unexpected accuracy of his comment made me pause. Actually, yes, I admitted, surprising both of us with my candor. Turns out my in-laws had other plans for me this Christmas. Curtis's expression softened. Their loss, Ms. Reynolds. For what it's worth, my wife and I were just saying the other day how that scholarship program you started for East Side kids is changing lives. Our nephew got one of those scholarships, first in our family headed to college. I hadn't known that. The East Charleston Educational Foundation was something I'd started quietly after my first major bonus, naming it after my mother. We'd provided over 50 full-ride scholarships to kids from my old neighborhood. I'm glad to hear that, Curtis. Education changed my life. I'm hoping it does the same for those students. Sure will, he nodded firmly. Way more than those fancy families, with their noses in the air, ever did for the community. You remember that today. As I rode the elevator to the executive floor, Curtis's words echoed in my mind. I had been so focused on fitting into the Blackwood family that I'd nearly forgotten what I'd built independently of them. The scholarship, foundation, my position at the company, the investments and financial structures I'd created. I wasn't just Michael Blackwood's socially awkward wife from the wrong side of town, trying desperately to win his mother's approval. I was Olivia Reynolds, CFO of Meridian Financial, with an investment portfolio that would make Thomas Blackwood's eyes water and a reputation in financial circles that had nothing to do with my marriage. In my office, I pulled up the records for Coastal Peninsula Investments, LLC. There it was, the paperwork showing ownership of the Blackwood family home mortgage. I'd established the LLC using my maiden name and a business address, keeping it separate from our personal finances. Michael had signed the paperwork without reading it, trusting me implicitly with the boring stuff. The terms were reasonable. I wasn't a predatory lender. But there were clauses about timely payment and conditions that would trigger certain actions. Conditions that would almost certainly come into play once our joint finances were separated. I leaned back in my chair, looking out over the Charleston skyline, the same view I'd stared at through tears last night. But today, I wasn't crying. Today, I was planning. My mother had raised me on a simple principle. They can take your things, but they can't take what's in your head. Her wisdom had guided me to prioritize education, to build skills no one could take away. Those skills had brought me here, to this moment of clear-eyed calculation as I mapped out my next steps. The Blackwoods had taken my Christmas, my marriage, and my illusions about family. But they had no idea what I was about. To take from them in return, their sense of security, their control, and most importantly, their assumption of superiority. I opened a new document and began to type, Strategic Dissolution Plan. Below it, I outlined phases for the coming months, financial separations, legal preparations, and contingencies. Phase 1 would begin today. By the time we reached Phase 3, Helen Blackwood would understand exactly who she had underestimated. My phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source, Caroline's husband, David. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I had no part in what happened last night, David's message read. For what it's worth, I think they were completely out of line. Are you okay? I stared at the text, unsure how to respond. David had always been the quiet one at family gatherings, an academic who'd married into the Blackwood dynasty and never quite found his footing within it. We'd shared knowing glances during particularly pretentious conversations, but rarely spoke directly. I'm fine, I typed back, then paused. Something prompted me to add, but I appreciate you checking. It means more than you know. His response was immediate. They don't speak for all of us, just so you know. A small kindness, but it landed like a life raft in an ocean of betrayal. Perhaps not everyone had seen me through Helen's distorted lens after all. I set my phone aside and turned back to my computer. David's text was a welcome reminder that the world wasn't as black and white as it had seemed in the raw aftermath of last night's humiliation. But sentiment wouldn't protect me now. Only strategy would. Before I could outline phase 2 of my plan, I needed to understand what my life had been before last night's implosion. Not just the surface reality, but the underlying truth I'd been blind to for 15 years. I'd met Michael Blackwood during my junior year of college. I was there on a full scholarship, working 2 part-time jobs to cover expenses my financial aid didn't. He was there because generations of Blackwoods had attended, their names etched on buildings and benches throughout campus. Our meeting, in the library at 2 a.m., both of us cramming for finals, had seemed like fate at the time. Michael had been drawn to my intensity, my clear sense of purpose. I'd been captivated by his easy charm, his ability to move through the world without the constant calculation poverty had taught me. When he'd introduced me to his family 6 months later, I'd been determined to win them over. Looking back now, I could see how that determination had set an unhealthy pattern. Helen's initial chill, "Oh, you're from East Charleston? How interesting. We don't get over that way much," had only intensified my resolve to prove myself worthy. I pulled out a legal pad and began to map the trajectory of our relationship. The early years when I'd worked at a local bank while Michael pursued his master's in education. His family's thinly veiled surprise when he'd chosen to teach rather than join his father's investment firm. The way Helen had implied it was somehow my fault, my practical influence steering him away from family tradition. The irony, of course, was that I'd encouraged Michael to join Thomas's firm. The steady income and family connections would have been logical advantages. But Michael had insisted teaching was his passion, that he wanted to forge his own path. I'd supported his choice wholeheartedly while quietly ensuring our financial future through my own career and investment decisions. I'd risen from bank teller to financial advisor to investment strategist, eventually landing at Meridian Financial where my background, so looked down upon by the Blackwoods, had proven to be my greatest asset. I understood how money worked from both sides, the desperation of not having it and the strategy of growing it. This dual perspective made me exceptional at my job, earning promotions that had gradually shifted the economic balance in our marriage. For years it hadn't mattered. Michael seemed proud of my success, happy to enjoy the lifestyle my income provided while pursuing a career he found meaningful. We'd built a comfortable life in a historic downtown condo, traveled extensively, and never argued about money, largely because I managed it all. When had things changed? I tapped my pen against the legal pad, trying to pinpoint the first fracture. The promotion to CFO 3 months ago had been a seismic shift. Suddenly, I wasn't just successful, I was prominent. My photo in the business journal, speaking engagements, invitations to sit on boards. The congratulatory messages had poured in from everyone, including Helen, who'd sent an elaborate flower arrangement to my office with a note reading, "The Blackwood family is so proud of your achievement." The Blackwood family, not we or I, as if my accomplishment belonged to them somehow, another jewel in their dynastic crown. A week after the promotion, Helen had invited us to Sunday dinner. "We should discuss how this affects your family." "Planning," she'd said casually over dessert. "These executive positions can be so demanding. Perhaps you should consider freezing your eggs before it's too late." I'd been 38 at the time, certainly not beyond childbearing years. But the implication was clear. My career success was a threat to what Helen considered my primary purpose, providing Blackwood grandchildren. Michael had laughed uncomfortably. "Mom, we've talked about this. Kids aren't in our immediate plans." Helen had fixed him with a look I now recognized all too well. "Plans change, dear. Priorities shift. Family is what matters in the end." Looking back, I could see how that dinner had been the beginning of a campaign. Weekly calls from Helen with articles about female executives stepping back for family. Comments about Michael's cousin whose wife had found true fulfillment after leaving her law practice to raise children. Suggestions that Michael must feel emasculated by my new title and salary. I'd ignored it all, too busy navigating my new role to recognize the undermining happening behind the scenes. And Michael, who'd once found his mother's interference amusing, had started listening. Small comments had slipped into our conversations. "Don't you think you're working too much?" And, "We hardly see each other anymore." Valid concerns? Perhaps, but tinged with something I couldn't quite identify at the time. Now I recognized it as Helen's influence, her worldview seeping into our marriage like poison. The Christmas disaster hadn't come from nowhere. It had been carefully orchestrated, with Michael as both victim and accomplice. Helen had been working on him for months, reframing my success as his failure, my financial acumen as control, my independence as a threat to their family structure. I forced myself to confront the hardest truth. Michael had let it happen. The man I'd loved for 15 years, who'd once admired my strength, had chosen his mother's approval over our partnership. Perhaps he always would have, given the right pressure at the right moment. My phone rang again, this time an unfamiliar number with the Charleston area code. "Olivia Reynolds," I answered, my professional voice automatically engaging. "Ms. Reynolds, this is Eliza Washington from Charleston Community Bank." The name was vaguely familiar, a loan officer I'd had minimal dealings with. "I apologize for calling during the holiday, but there seems to be an unusual flag on the Blackwood family home mortgage. The system shows you as the contact person for the holding company." I straightened in my chair. "Yes, that's correct." "Well, we've received notification of an impending status change on the account. I was hoping to clarify the situation before processing." This was unexpected. The only trigger for a status change would be, "Mr. Blackwood came in this morning to remove you from their household accounts," she continued, confirming my suspicion. "Standard procedure requires us to notify all parties on connected financial instruments. When I processed the removal, it triggered an automatic alert on the mortgage held by Coastal Peninsula Investments." Michael had moved quickly, more quickly than I'd anticipated, which meant Helen's influence was even stronger than I'd realized. He'd gone to the bank first thing on December 26th to financially cut me off. A strategic move I might have admired if it wasn't so personally devastating. "Thank you for the notification, Ms. Washington. The alert is functioning as designed." I kept my voice steady. "Please proceed with Mr. Blackwood's request regarding the household accounts. The mortgage situation will be handled separately by Coastal Peninsula Investments. You should expect formal communication within the week." "Of course, Ms. Reynolds." Again, I apologize for the holiday interruption. After ending the call, I sat motionless, absorbing this new development. Michael wasn't just following his mother's script. He was actively trying to limit my financial connection to their family. He clearly didn't understand the full implications of what he'd set in motion. I turned back to my computer and began drafting a formal letter from Coastal Peninsula Investments, LLC, to the current residents of the Blackwood family home. It was time to initiate Phase 2. 3 hours later, I left my office with a comprehensive plan in place. The holiday had worked to my advantage. The emptiness of the building had allowed me to focus without interruption, to transform raw emotion into calculated action. As I drove back to the hotel, I felt a strange sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. My phone had accumulated dozens of notifications, mostly from friends and colleagues who'd seen Michael's abrupt relationship, status change on social media. Apparently, he'd wasted no time making our separation public. The caption, "Sometimes the hardest decisions are the most necessary for personal growth," had garnered sympathetic responses from his network, effectively controlling the narrative, before I'd had a chance to process what was happening. I didn't bother responding to the flood of concerned messages. Social media optics were the least of my concerns right now. Let Michael have his performative moment of self-discovery. Reality would unfold on a much different timeline than the carefully curated version he was presenting to the world. At the hotel, I requested to extend my stay for 2 weeks while I sought more permanent accommodations. The thought of finding a new home hadn't fully registered until that moment. Our condo was jointly owned, but I had no desire to fight for it. Better to make a clean break, to build something that had no association with the Blackwoods or their influence. That evening, I ordered room service and opened my laptop again. If Michael was already separating our finances, I needed to, accelerate certain aspects of my plan. First, I transferred my personal portion of our joint savings to my individual account, exactly half, not a penny more or less. Next, I emailed our financial advisor, Ryan Peters, with instructions to freeze our joint investment portfolio pending legal division. Then I contacted the 3 credit cards we shared and requested immediate removal from the accounts. Every action was measured, documented, and precisely in accordance with standard divorce financial protocols. I would not give Michael or his family any ammunition to paint me as vindictive or grasping. When this was over, no one would be able to claim I had acted with anything but textbook propriety. The mortgage situation was different. That was business, not personal. A distinction the Blackwoods had never quite grasped, but would soon come to understand intimately. I was about to shut down my computer when an email notification appeared, from Michael, sent to my personal account rather than my work address. Subject: Moving forward. Liv, I know yesterday was difficult, and I apologize for how things unfolded. That wasn't how I wanted to have this conversation. Mom can be overwhelming when she feels protective, but her heart was in the right place. I've spoken with Erwin Chambers about handling our separation with minimal conflict. I think it's best if I remain in the condo for now, since your new salary should make finding alternate housing easier for you. I'm prepared to be generous about dividing our assets, despite the financial imbalance your recent promotion has created. I hope we can keep this civilized. Despite everything, I still care about you and want the best for both of us as we move on to new chapters. Michael P.S. I've taken the liberty of removing you from our household accounts to prevent any confusion during the transition. Erwin advised this was standard procedure. The breathtaking presumptuousness of the message left me momentarily speechless. The financial imbalance he referenced so delicately was, in fact, my years of careful investment and career advancement that had allowed us to live well beyond what his teacher's salary could have provided. His concern about my ability to find housing with my new salary ignored the fact that I'd been out-earning him for most of our marriage. And the casual mention of Erwin Chambers, whom he believed was his attorney rather than mine, was almost comical in its misplaced confidence. I closed the laptop without responding. Some revelations were best delivered in person, at precisely the right moment. Michael's email had only confirmed what my strategic planning had already assumed. He was operating with incomplete information and misplaced confidence. That combination would work to my advantage in the weeks ahead. The next morning, I woke early and went for a run along the waterfront. Physical activity had always cleared my head, and I needed complete mental clarity for today's tasks. First, on my agenda was finding an apartment. Charleston's rental market was notoriously tight, especially in the historic district, but I had connections through my position at Meridian. By noon, I'd secured a furnished two-bedroom in a restored Victorian just off King Street, ironically in a building owned by a real estate investment trust that Meridian helped finance. Next was the meeting I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Lunch with Erwin Chambers to formally discuss my situation. Erwin had suggested we meet at his office, but I preferred neutral territory. We agreed on a quiet restaurant in Mount Pleasant, away from downtown where we might encounter mutual acquaintances. Erwin arrived precisely on time, his silver hair immaculately styled, his manner more subdued than usual. He ordered sparkling water and waited until our server had departed before speaking. "I received an interesting call from Michael Blackwood yesterday," he began, studying me over his reading glasses. "He seems to be under the impression that I'll be representing him in your divorce proceedings." "And what did you tell him?" I asked, sipping my iced tea. "That I have a conflict of interest, of course. I referred him to Charlotte Davies across town." He set his water glass down deliberately. "What I didn't mention was the nature of that conflict, specifically, my long-standing representation of both you personally and Coastal Peninsula Investments, LLC. I nodded, appreciating his discretion. "And how did he take the referral?" "With some surprise. Apparently, his mother had assured him I would take care of everything. Helen has a rather inflated sense of her influence in this town." His expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry about all this, Olivia. 15 years is a long time to invest in a relationship that ends so abruptly." "It is," I agreed. "But I'm discovering the relationship ended long before Christmas dinner. I just didn't recognize the signs." Erwin nodded, unsurprised. He'd been in divorce law long enough to know how marriages could erode invisibly until a triggering event brought the damage into sudden, stark relief. "Let's discuss your priorities," he said, shifting to business mode as our salads arrived. "Based on the circumstances, South Carolina's equitable distribution laws should work in your favor, particularly given the financial contributions you've made to the marriage." "I'm not concerned about the divorce settlement," I said, surprising him. "Michael can keep the condo. We can split the investment portfolio exactly down the middle. I won't contest anything except attempts to diminish my professional reputation." Erwin's eyebrows rose. "That's unusually generous given the circumstances." "It's not generosity. It's efficiency. I want this chapter closed quickly so I can move forward unencumbered." I leaned forward slightly. "My primary concern is protecting Coastal Peninsula Investments and ensuring its business dealings remain separate from our personal matters." Understanding dawned in Erwin's eyes. "Ah, the mortgage." "The mortgage," I confirmed. "When Thomas Blackwood's investment went sideways 3 years ago, they were 3 payments from foreclosure. The holding company I created purchased the mortgage at a substantial discount due to the payment history, then restructured the terms to give them breathing room." "Which they've been faithfully paying," Erwin noted. "Largely thanks to your contributions to the family finances." "Exactly. But now that Michael has separated our accounts, and I'll no longer be contributing to the household income, I anticipate they'll struggle to maintain the payment schedule." Erwin's expression remained neutral, but I could see his legal mind calculating the implications. "And when they miss a payment?" "When they miss a payment, Coastal Peninsula Investments will follow standard business protocol for addressing delinquency." I met his gaze steadily. "I won't be vindictive, Erwin, but I also won't extend special consideration to people who showed me none." He nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll ensure all communications from the LLC are properly formatted and legally sound." However, he added with characteristic caution, I should advise you that using the mortgage as leverage in divorce proceedings could potentially— I'm not using it as leverage, I interrupted. I'm simply allowing normal business processes to proceed without interference. The timing is coincidental. A slight smile played at the corner of his mouth. Of course, purely coincidental. By the time lunch concluded, we had outlined a comprehensive approach to both the divorce and the mortgage situation. Erwin would handle all communications, ensuring appropriate legal distance between my personal circumstances and the business operations of Coastal Peninsula Investments. As we were preparing to leave, Erwin paused. One more thing, Olivia. Helen Blackwood called my office this morning. I stilled. What did she want? To inform me that Michael's decision to pursue divorce was fully supported by the family and that they expected my cooperation in ensuring a fair outcome that respected the Blackwood family's position in the community. His tone was bone dry. And your response? I informed her that all communication regarding her son's divorce should come through his own legal representation, not his mother. He adjusted his tie with precise movements. She didn't appreciate my suggestion. I can imagine, I said, unable to suppress a small smile at the mental image of Helen's reaction. She was accustomed to deference, particularly from Charleston's professional class, who often depended on connections to old money families like the Blackwoods. One last piece of advice, Erwin said as we walked to our cars. Don't underestimate Helen. She values appearances above all else, and right now, you represent a threat to how the family is perceived. She'll fight to control the narrative, regardless of the cost. I'm counting on it, I replied, the winter sunlight casting long shadows across the parking lot. Some people show their true nature only when they believe they're winning. Later that afternoon, as I was settling into my hotel room to review work emails, my phone rang with Caroline's number. I hesitated before answering, unsure what Michael's sister could possibly have to say that I needed to hear. Olivia? It's Caroline. Her voice carried the same cultured Charleston accent as her mother's, though without Helen's razor edge. I hope it's all right that I'm calling. That depends on why you're calling, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. A pause. I wanted to apologize for Christmas, for not speaking up when Mom was, well, when everything happened. The apology was unexpected, especially given her message in the family group chat afterward. Thank you, I said cautiously. But I saw your text, Caroline, about how my departure was overdue? She exhaled sharply. God, I'm such a coward sometimes. Mom was reading all our responses. You know how she gets when she's on a mission. I did know. Helen's missions had shaped family events for years. Campaigns to persuade Thomas to retire, to convince Michael's brother James to break up with an unsuitable girlfriend, to pressure various family members into compliance with her vision of what the Blackwoods should be. Why are you really calling? I asked, too emotionally drained for social niceties. Because David read me the riot act after Christmas dinner, she admitted. Said we were all complicit in something ugly and mean. He's right, of course. We've always let Mom steamroll everyone, and you got the worst of it because I wasn't born a Blackwood, I finished for her. Yes, she said quietly. That's exactly it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know not everyone agrees with what happened, even if we weren't brave enough to say so at the time. It was an olive branch of sorts, though a flimsy one. Still, in the emotional wasteland of the past 2 days, even this small acknowledgement of wrongdoing felt significant. I appreciate the call, I said finally, but I need to focus on moving forward now. Of course, I understand. She hesitated before adding, just so you know, Mom's on the warpath. She's already talking to the family about how to handle the divorce to minimize as she puts it, disruption to the Blackwood reputation. I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation was useful. Thanks for the warning. After ending the call, I added this new information to my strategic assessment. Helen was mobilizing the family to protect their image, which meant she saw me as a threat rather than an irrelevance. That perception would shape her actions in the coming weeks, potentially making her more aggressive, but also more predictable. I glanced at the calendar on my phone. 3 days until the end of the month when the Blackwoods' mortgage payment would be due. 3 days until the first test of their financial stability without my contribution. 3 days until phase 2 of my plan truly began. The woman who had sat crying in her car on Christmas night was already receding, like a tide pulling back, from shore. In her place stood someone clearer-eyed and resolute, someone who understood that the greatest revenge wouldn't come from anger or spite, but from allowing natural consequences to unfold with precision and patience. Helen Blackwood had never respected me. Soon she would have no choice. The next morning, I woke to an email notification that temporarily knocked me off balance. It was from Meridian Financial's HR department, requesting an urgent meeting at 10 a.m. No further details provided. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them positive. Had Michael or Helen contacted my workplace? Were they attempting to undermine my professional standing as well? I showered and dressed with particular care, selecting a tailored charcoal suit and the pearl earrings I'd bought myself after landing the CFO position. Whatever this meeting entailed, I would face it with poise and preparation. Arriving at Meridian's offices, I was immediately ushered into a conference room where Edward Manning, the CEO, sat with Vanessa Chen from HR and Jonathan Reeves, our chief legal counsel. Their expressions gave nothing away. "Olivia," Edward began after I'd taken a seat. "Thank you for coming in on such short notice, especially given what I understand has been a challenging personal situation." So they knew. The question was, what exactly did they know, and how had they learned it? "We received a rather unusual call yesterday," Jonathan said, answering my unspoken question. "From Helen Blackwood." I kept my expression neutral despite the surge of anger I felt. "I see. May I ask what Mrs. Blackwood wanted?" Vanessa glanced at her notes. She expressed concerns about potential conflicts of interest regarding your position as CFO and certain personal investment vehicles you manage. Specifically, she mentioned Coastal Peninsula Investments, LLC. The audacity was breathtaking. Helen hadn't even waited for Michael's divorce paperwork to be filed before attempting to damage my professional reputation. She'd gone straight for what she perceived as my vulnerability, the separation between my personal investments and my fiduciary responsibility to Meridian. "I understand," I said calmly, "and I appreciate you bringing this to my attention directly rather than making assumptions." Edward leaned forward. "Olivia, you've been with Meridian for 8 years. Your integrity has never been in question. But given the nature of the allegations and your position, we needed to address this immediately." "Of course," I agreed. "Transparency is essential. Coastal Peninsula Investments is indeed my company, established 3 years ago as a vehicle for personal property investments. It's fully documented in my annual disclosure forms as required by Meridian's ethics policy." I removed a folder from my briefcase, the one I'd prepared last night, anticipating some form of attack from the Blackwoods, though I hadn't expected it to come so quickly or directly. This contains the complete documentation of Coastal Peninsula's formation, its investments, and the full disclosure history to Meridian's compliance department. You'll note that all activities fall well within our company's guidelines for executive personal investments. Jonathan took the folder, scanning the contents with practiced efficiency. "The Blackwood property mortgage acquisition?" "Included on page 4, I confirmed. The transaction was executed through standard channels at prevailing market rates, when the previous lender was preparing to foreclose. All terms are conventional and compliant with industry standards. Edward and Vanessa exchanged glances as Jonathan continued reviewing the documentation. After several minutes, he closed the folder and nodded to Edward. "Everything appears to be in order," he confirmed. "The disclosures were properly filed and approved by compliance at the time of acquisition. There's no conflict with Meridian's interests or policies." Edward's expression softened slightly. "I had expected as much, but we needed to verify given the assertive nature of Mrs. Blackwood's claims." "May I ask what specifically she alleged?" I inquired, maintaining my professional tone despite my internal fury. Vanessa hesitated before responding. "She suggested that you had used insider knowledge from Meridian to acquire their family home mortgage at below market value, and that you were now threatening foreclosure to gain leverage in your divorce proceedings." The calculated manipulation of facts was impressive, in a disturbing way. Helen had taken the bare elements of truth and twisted them into something sinister. "I understand how serious these allegations are," I said. "The reality is much simpler. My father-in-law made a poor investment decision 3 years ago that nearly cost them their home. Rather than let the property go to foreclosure, which would have damaged the family's standing, I created a holding company to purchase and restructure the mortgage. They've been making regular payments since then, largely subsidized by my contributions to the household." I met Edward's gaze directly. "Now that my husband has separated our finances and is pursuing divorce, those contributions will naturally cease. If the Blackwoods can't maintain their payment schedule without my financial support, that's an unfortunate consequence of their choices, not a manufactured threat." Jonathan nodded, apparently satisfied with my explanation. "From a legal standpoint, I see no issue here. Your personal investments were properly disclosed, and any actions taken by your investment company would be standard business practice, not an ethics violation." "Thank you," I said. "I value my position at Meridian and would never jeopardize it, especially not for personal vendettas." Edward's posture relaxed. "Consider the matter closed, then, though I suspect this won't be the last we hear from Mrs. Blackwood." "Probably not," I agreed. "She's quite determined." As I stood to leave, Edward added, "Olivia, while I have you here, the Singapore project is proceeding ahead of schedule. The clients are extremely impressed with the financial modeling you developed. They've requested you personally for the presentation in February." The Singapore project, a major international expansion that would significantly elevate Meridian's global profile. Under different circumstances, being selected to lead the presentation would have been cause for celebration. "I'm honored," I said sincerely, "and I'll ensure my personal situation doesn't impact my work in any way." "We never doubted that," Edward assured me. "But Olivia, take care of yourself. Divorce is difficult enough without additional complications." As I left the meeting, I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that my professional standing remained intact, pride in my careful documentation and preparation, and a simmering anger at Helen's blatant attempt to undermine me. But beneath those feelings lay something unexpected, a growing sense of power. Helen had played what she believed was her strongest card, attacking my professional reputation, and it had failed spectacularly. Not because of luck, but because I had anticipated the move and prepared accordingly. For years, I'd seen myself as an outsider desperately trying to win acceptance from the Blackwood family. But that perspective had blinded me to my own strengths. I wasn't the vulnerable one in this equation. They were. And they were just beginning to realize it. I returned to my office to find 3 voicemails from Michael. I listened to them in sequence, noting the progression from annoyed to concerned, to borderline panicked. "Liv, Mom just told me she spoke with someone at your company. Call me back." "Olivia, seriously, what's going on with Coastal Peninsula? Why is your name on our mortgage? Call me immediately." Look, I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't appropriate. My parents nearly had a heart attack when they got a letter from some company about their mortgage. We need to talk. Now. So the formal notice from Coastal Peninsula Investments had arrived at the Blackwood home. That explained the escalation from Helen. She wasn't just being proactive in attacking me, she was responding to the discovery that her family's financial stability wasn't as secure as she'd believed. I texted Michael rather than returning his calls. I'm in meetings all day. Your parents received standard notification that the mortgage holder has been informed of our separation. Nothing inappropriate or unusual about it. His response was immediate. What do you mean you're the mortgage holder? Since when? I allowed myself a small smile. Since 3 years ago, when your father's investment in that yacht club development collapsed and they were facing foreclosure. We discussed it at the time. I found a creative solution, remember? The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before his reply finally came through. You told me you'd arranged refinancing through your banking connections. I did. Coastal Peninsula Investments is my company, created specifically to handle the transaction. Your father signed all the paperwork. Did he not read what he was signing? Again, the typing indicator flickered on and off. I could almost see Michael struggling to process this information, to reconcile it with the narrative his mother had constructed about me. Finally, we need to meet. This changes everything. Does it? I replied. The mortgage terms remain exactly the same. Nothing has changed except your awareness of who holds the note. The only practical difference is that I'll no longer be contributing to the household finances that help make the payments. When no response came, I added, I'll be at Luca Cafe tomorrow at noon if you want to discuss this civilly. Setting my phone aside, I turned my attention to work matters. The Singapore project needed my focus, and I refused to let the Blackwood drama derail my professional obligations. For the next several hours, I immersed myself in financial models and projections, finding comfort in the clarity of numbers and strategic planning. It was nearly 7 when my office phone rang, an internal call from reception. Ms. Reynolds, there's a Mr. Thomas Blackwood here asking to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. My father-in-law had come to my workplace. This was unexpected. Thomas typically avoided confrontation, preferring to let Helen handle uncomfortable situations. Please send him up, I instructed, quickly tidying my desk and composing myself. Thomas Blackwood entered my office looking markedly older than he had at Christmas dinner just days ago. His normally impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled, his confident posture diminished. He'd aged a decade in less than a week. Olivia? He began awkwardly, declining my offer to sit. I think there's been a misunderstanding about our home. No misunderstanding, Thomas, I replied evenly. Your mortgage is held by Coastal Peninsula Investments, as it has been for 3 years. The only change is that you're now aware of it. He ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture so reminiscent of Michael that it momentarily caught me off guard. Why didn't you tell us? He asked, genuine confusion in his voice. The question surprised me. I'd expected accusations, not confusion. I did tell you, I reminded him. After your yacht club investment failed, and Citizens Bank was preparing to foreclose, I told you I would find a solution through my financial connections. You and Elizabeth signed the refinancing paperwork. But you didn't say you were the one buying the mortgage, he protested. Would that have mattered? The terms were favorable, better than you would have received elsewhere given your credit situation at the time. The interest rate was fair. The payment structure was designed to be manageable. Thomas looked away, studying the Charleston harbor visible through my office window. Helen thinks you did this deliberately, that you've been planning something all along. Planning what exactly? I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. To help save your family home when you were facing foreclosure? To structure a financial solution that kept your financial difficulties private, when public foreclosure would have embarrassed Helen in front of her social circle? To subsidize your mortgage payments for 3 years through my contributions to the household finances? He had no answer for that. Thomas, I said more gently, I've never had any intention of using the mortgage against your family. It was a business transaction designed to help, not harm. The letter you received was standard notification when ownership circumstances change. In this case, my separation from Michael. And now? He asked quietly. What happens now? It was the question beneath all their panic, the fear driving Helen's preemptive attack on my professional reputation. Now nothing changes with the mortgage itself, I explained. The terms remain exactly as they've been for 3 years. The only difference is that I'll no longer be contributing to Michael's finances, which means your family will need to adjust your budget to cover the full payment yourselves. Relief flickered across his face. That's all? We just keep making the same payments? That's all, I confirmed. Assuming the payments are made on time, nothing changes. The implication hung in the air between us. If the payments weren't made on time, standard default procedures would apply. Not out of vindictiveness, but as normal business practice. Thomas nodded slowly, absorbing this information. I'll explain to Helen. She's been agitated since the letter arrived. I imagine she has, I said neutrally. It can be unsettling to discover you don't have all the information you thought you did. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time in 15 years. You're not what we thought, are you? The statement held layers of meaning, some complimentary, some not. Rather than untangle them, I simply said, I never was, Thomas. That was the problem all along. After he left, I remained at my desk, contemplating the encounter. Thomas had come alone, without Helen, a small but significant break from their usual united front. His concern had been practical rather than accusatory. Was it possible that not all the Blackwoods shared Helen's militant opposition to me? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I was surprised to find a message from Elizabeth, Thomas's sister. Is it true? You own the River Roadhouse mortgage? The River Roadhouse was the family's vacation property in the mountains, a lakefront cottage that had been in the Blackwood family for generations. It was separate from the main Charleston residence. I frowned, replying, No, Coastal Peninsula only holds the mortgage on the Charleston house. Her response was immediate. That's not what Helen is telling everyone. She says you've secretly taken over all the family properties and are threatening to evict Thomas's mother from River Road. The fabrication was so outlandish I almost laughed. Thomas's mother had passed away 5 years earlier, and the River Road property had been fully paid off decades ago. That's completely false, I wrote back. I have no connection to the River Road property at all. The only mortgage Coastal Peninsula holds is on the Charleston house, with standard terms that haven't changed in 3 years. I thought it sounded extreme, even for a divorce situation, Elizabeth replied. Helen has been making all sorts of claims since Christmas. I hesitated before asking, what else is she saying? The typing indicator appeared for nearly a minute, before Elizabeth's lengthy response arrived. That you married Michael for his family connections to advance your career. That you've been systematically taking control of family assets. That you fabricated the promotion to CFO by manipulating financial reports. That you're possibly involved in some kind of financial fraud. She's been calling everyone in the family and social circle to warn them about you. The scope of Helen's campaign shocked even me. She wasn't just trying to control the divorce narrative. She was attempting to completely destroy my reputation both professionally and personally. None of that is true, I replied, keeping my response simple. My promotion was earned through years of hard work. The only Blackwood property I have Any connection, too, is the Charleston house mortgage, which I acquired to help the family, not harm them. I believed there was more to the story, Elizabeth wrote. Helen's version seemed overwrought. Thank you for clarifying. Another potential ally, or at least another family member questioning Helen's version of events. The cracks in her control were beginning to show. I left the office shortly afterward, stopping by my new apartment to measure for furniture delivery. The space was smaller than the condo I'd shared with Michael, but it had character. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, and large windows that filled the rooms with natural light. As I stood in what would be my new living room, I felt a surprising sense of possibility rather than loss. This space was entirely mine. No Blackwood influence. No compromise with Michael's more traditional tastes. No consideration of Helen's opinions on decor. For the first time in 15 years, I could create a home that reflected only my preferences and priorities. I ordered takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, the one Helen had always deemed too ethnic for family gatherings, and ate it sitting cross-legged on the floor of my empty apartment, blueprints for my new life spread around me. The next day, I arrived at Luca Cafe precisely at noon, selecting a table with clear sightlines to the entrance. Michael was uncharacteristically prompt, appearing at 12:03, looking harried and sleep-deprived. "Have you been reading the documents Irwin sent over?" he asked immediately, sliding into the seat across from me. "Hello to you too," I replied calmly. "Yes, I've reviewed everything. It's straightforward. An equitable division of assets acquired during the marriage." He ran a hand through his hair, the same gesture I'd seen from Thomas the day before. "Except for the house mortgage. You didn't include that in the asset disclosure." "Because it's not a marital asset," I explained. "Coastal Peninsula Investments is a separate legal entity, formed using funds from my trust, the inheritance from my grandmother that predates our marriage. The company's activities aren't subject to divorce proceedings." His expression darkened. "So you've just been waiting for the right moment to spring this trap." "There is no trap, Michael. The mortgage has existed unchanged for 3 years. You've been making partial payments on it all that time, with my income covering the difference. Now you'll need to cover the full amount." The waiter approached and we paused to order a Greek salad for me, a sandwich for Michael. When we were alone again, Michael leaned forward. "Mom thinks you planned this from the beginning, that you've been maneuvering to take the family home?" "And what do you think?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You've known me for nearly 20 years. Do you actually believe I orchestrated a decades-long con to acquire a mortgage on a house I never even lived in?" He looked away, conflict evident in his expression. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Everything's happening so fast." "It is happening fast," I agreed. "But not because of my actions. I wasn't the one who engineered a public humiliation at Christmas dinner. I wasn't the one who immediately separated our finances and changed my relationship status on social media. I wasn't the one who called my spouse's employer with false allegations." Michael had the grace to look embarrassed. "Mom was just trying to protect the family." "From what? From me ensuring your parents didn't lose their home to foreclosure 3 years ago? From me subsidizing their mortgage payments with my income? From me building a successful career that provided us with financial security?" Our food arrived, creating another pause in the increasingly tense conversation. I took a bite of my salad, giving Michael time to formulate his response. "You've changed," he finally said, the familiar refrain that had become his explanation for every conflict in recent months. "I've grown," I corrected. "There's a difference. The question is why that growth threatens you and your family so much." He had no answer for that, at least not one he was willing to articulate. Instead, he changed tactics. "What do you want, Liv? Just tell me what it will take to resolve this situation with my parents' house." "There's nothing to resolve," I said simply. As long as the mortgage payments are made on time, nothing changes. This isn't about revenge or leverage. It's simply business. Business, he repeated, a bitter edge to his voice. That's what everything comes down to with you, isn't it? Just numbers and transactions. The accusation stung more than I wanted to admit. For years, I'd managed our finances, invested carefully, and built security for our future, not because I valued money above all else, but because I understood from my childhood what happened when financial stability crumbled. Michael had never had to worry about that, cushioned by family wealth and connections even when his own choices had created financial strain. No, Michael, not everything. But some things, like mortgages, are indeed business transactions with clear terms and expectations. Your family signed a contract. All they need to do is honor it. He pushed his half-eaten sandwich away. I don't even recognize you anymore. That's the problem, I said quietly. You never really saw me in the first place. Michael stared. At me across the table, a flicker of something. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding, crossing his face before it was replaced by the defensive mask I'd grown accustomed to in recent months. That's not fair, he said finally. We were happy for years. You can't rewrite our entire history because of one bad Christmas dinner. I'm not rewriting anything, I replied, keeping my voice level despite the frustration building inside me. I'm finally seeing it clearly. Tell me something, Michael. Why did you marry me? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? Because I loved you. And what did you love about me, specifically? He shifted uncomfortably. Is this really necessary? Picking apart our relationship like this? Humor me, I insisted. What qualities drew you to me at 22 that were so compelling you wanted to build a life together? Michael sighed, glancing around the cafe as if seeking escape. Finding none, he reluctantly engaged. You were different from other girls I'd dated, more serious, more focused. You knew exactly what you wanted and how to get it. It was impressive. So, my ambition and determination attracted you, I noted. The very qualities your mother found so threatening. It wasn't like that, he protested. Mom just worried. You were pushing yourself too hard, that your focus on career might eventually... He trailed off, suddenly aware of the trap he'd walked into. Might eventually what? I prompted. Make me outpace you? Shift the power balance in our relationship? Challenge the Blackwood family's assumptions about a woman's proper role? Michael's jaw tightened. You're twisting my words. I'm clarifying what was always unspoken between us, I countered. You admired my drive until it carried me beyond the boundaries your family found acceptable. You celebrated my success until it overshadowed yours. You valued my financial acumen until it gave me independence. A faint flush crept up his neck, a telltale sign of discomfort I'd observed countless times during family gatherings, when conversation veered into territory the Blackwoods found uncomfortable. That's a convenient narrative, he said stiffly. Framing yourself as some feminist hero oppressed by my traditional family. Not oppressed, I corrected. Underestimated. There's a significant difference. The lunch ended shortly afterward, neither of us having much appetite for food or further conversation. As we parted outside the cafe, Michael paused. Mom's hosting a family dinner this Sunday, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. She's invited Charlotte Davies, my new attorney. They want to discuss a settlement proposal regarding the house. So that was their strategy, using a family gathering to present a united front, to leverage social pressure in a setting where Helen held home court advantage. Please extend my regrets to your mother, I replied. Any settlement discussions should occur through proper legal channels. Irwin will be happy to review official proposals from Ms. Davies when they're ready. This could be resolved more quickly in person, Michael pressed. More amicably. I studied him for a moment. This man I'd shared my life with for 15 years. He genuinely believed a Sunday dinner at his mother's house, where I'd be surrounded by Blackwoods, isolated and pressured, would somehow produce a more amicable resolution than a straightforward legal process. When have any difficult conversations at your mother's dinner table ever been resolved amicably? I asked gently. Particularly ones that challenged her vision of how things should be? He had no answer for that, and we parted ways without further discussion. As I walked back to my office, I found myself reflecting on our relationship, not with the raw pain of betrayal that had dominated my thoughts since Christmas, but with a more analytical perspective. What had our marriage actually been, beneath the surface appearances we'd both maintained? Michael had been drawn to qualities in me that his upbringing had discouraged in the women of his family: ambition, self-reliance, financial acumen. Yet, he'd never fully reconciled his attraction to those traits with the expectations embedded in his family's culture. The result had been a marriage built on unacknowledged contradictions, functioning smoothly only as long as those contradictions remained comfortably submerged. My promotion to CFO had forced those contradictions into the open. My success had made them impossible to ignore. And faced with the choice between embracing a partnership of equals or retreating to the familiar hierarchy of his upbringing, Michael had chosen the latter. Not in one dramatic moment, but through a series of small surrenders to his mother's influence, culminating in that Christmas dinner debacle. The realization was both painful and liberating. Our marriage hadn't suddenly failed. It had always been built on a foundation that couldn't withstand genuine success on my part. The cracks had been there from the beginning, hidden beneath the veneer of compatibility we'd both worked to maintain. Back at my office, I found an email from Charlotte Davies, Michael's new attorney, requesting a formal meeting to discuss an expedited settlement regarding outstanding property matters. I forwarded it to Erwin with a brief note explaining the attempted Sunday dinner gambit, then turned my attention to work matters. 2 days later, Erwin called with news. Charlotte Davies reached out with their initial proposal, he began, his tone suggesting he found something amusing about the situation. It's creative, I'll give them that. Creative how? I asked, bracing for whatever scheme Helen had concocted. They're proposing that Coastal Peninsula Investments transfer the Blackwood mortgage back to the original lender at the same discounted rate you acquired it for 3 years ago. In exchange, they're offering to waive any claim to your recent bonus compensation and stock options. I couldn't help but laugh at the audacity. So they want me to return the mortgage that saved their home at the same distressed price I paid during foreclosure proceedings, essentially giving up 3 years of market appreciation and interest in exchange for not pursuing money that's already legally protected as separate property? Essentially, yes, Erwin confirmed. They're positioning it as a clean break that would benefit both parties. Both parties meaning the Blackwoods maintain their illusion of financial independence while I absorb the actual cost, I translated. What's Charlotte's take on this proposal? She can't seriously think it's reasonable. Reading between the lines of her email, I suspect she's following client instructions against her better judgment, Erwin replied diplomatically. She included some language about hoping to find common ground that acknowledges the complexity of family dynamics. In other words, Helen drafted the proposal, and Charlotte is doing her professional best with impossible parameters, I surmised. That would be my assessment, Erwin agreed. How would you like to respond? I considered the options. A flat rejection would likely escalate tensions further, while a counter-proposal might encourage continued attempts at manipulation. Let's acknowledge receipt and indicate we're reviewing the proposal, I decided. Then we wait. The end of the month is in 4 days. Let's see if the mortgage payment arrives on time before we engage further. Erwin's tone held a note of appreciation. A strategic patience approach. Very well. The next few days passed in a blur of work commitments. The Singapore project demanded significant attention, requiring late nights and early mornings. I welcomed the distraction, finding comfort in the familiar challenges of financial modeling and strategic planning. My new apartment gradually took shape as furniture deliveries arrived and personal items were unpacked. I hired a decorator, something I'd always wanted to do but Michael had resisted, preferring to maintain his family's traditional aesthetic in our home. The result was a space that reflected my own tastes: clean lines, bold colors, contemporary art, and thoughtfully organized storage systems. Caroline texted occasionally with updates on family dynamics. Helen's continuing campaign to reframe the narrative, Michael's increasing discomfort with his mother's escalating tactics, Thomas's uncharacteristic withdrawal from the situation. These glimpses behind the scenes confirmed my decision to maintain distance while events unfolded. On January 31st, mortgage payment due date, I received an expected call from Coastal Peninsula's accounting service. "Ms. Reynolds, we're calling regarding the Blackwood property payment. There's been no activity on the account as of close of business today. Thank you for notifying me," I replied. "Please proceed with the standard protocol for late payments." "Yes, ma'am. A courtesy reminder will be sent tomorrow, followed by a formal notice in 5 days if no payment is received." I thanked them and ended the call, a curious sense of calm settling over me. The Blackwoods had made their first move in this financial chess match, or perhaps more accurately, their first non-move. Whether it represented strategic calculation or simple denial remained to be seen. The following morning, my phone rang, with Thomas Blackwood's number. I hesitated before answering, uncertain whether to engage directly or maintain the professional buffer of legal representation. Curiosity won out. "Good morning, Thomas." "Olivia." His voice sounded strained. "We just received a payment reminder from Coastal Peninsula Investments." "Yes, that's standard procedure when a payment deadline passes," I confirmed. "Is there a problem with making the payment?" A heavy silence filled the line. Helen. "Helen thinks we shouldn't pay until the settlement negotiations are complete. She says it would undermine our position." The strategic error was so profound I momentarily struggled to formulate a response. Helen was treating a legally binding mortgage like a negotiating chip in divorce proceedings, a fundamental misunderstanding of both finance and law. "Thomas," I said carefully, "the mortgage obligation exists independently of any divorce settlement discussions. Missing payments will damage your credit rating and trigger default procedures that operate according to banking regulations, not personal preference." "I tried to explain that," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "But Helen insists this is all part of some negotiating tactic on your part." "It's not a tactic, Thomas. It's a mortgage, a legal financial instrument with specific terms and consequences. The payment reminder isn't coming from me personally. It's an automated system from the servicing company." Another silence, this one longer. "Helen won't listen to me on this," he finally admitted. "She's convinced herself." "You're bluffing." The psychological insight was sudden and clarifying. Helen wasn't just being stubborn, she was in denial. She genuinely couldn't accept that her family's financial stability depended on honoring obligations to me, the outsider she'd spent 15 years subtly diminishing. Her pride couldn't accommodate that reality, so she'd constructed an alternative narrative where my business actions were personal manipulations that could be countered with sufficient will. "I understand this is difficult," I said, softening my tone. "But please consider the practical consequences. A missed mortgage payment affects credit scores. Multiple missed payments trigger default provisions. These aren't negotiable threats. They're standard financial processes. What would you suggest?" Thomas asked, surprising me with his directness. "Make the payment," I advised simply. "Protect your credit standing and home security while the attorneys handle divorce negotiations separately. Those are distinct matters and should remain so." He thanked me and ended the call, leaving me uncertain whether my advice would overcome Helen's influence. 3 days later, I had my answer. The accounting service called to confirm that a payment had been received. Partial payment. Exactly half of the amount due, with a note specifying it came from Thomas personally, not from joint funds. It was a classic Helen compromise, acknowledging the obligation enough to prevent immediate default consequences while still maintaining the appearance of resistance. Half measures had always been her specialty when direct confrontation proved untenable. I instructed the accounting service to apply the partial payment and continue with standard procedures for the remaining balance. Another reminder would be generated, followed by formal notices if the amount remained outstanding. That evening, as I was reviewing design proposals for my new apartment's kitchen renovation, my phone buzzed with a text from David, Caroline's husband. Family meeting happening now. Helen furious about second notice after Thomas paid. Michael uncomfortable. Thomas trying to explain banking procedures. Helen not listening. Thought you should know the dynamics. I thanked him for the update, appreciating these occasional glimpses behind the Blackwood curtain. David had become an unexpected ally, not actively taking my side, but providing objective information that helped me understand the evolving situation. Another text arrived moments later. Helen planning major move. Overheard her telling Michael she's calling in favors to handle situation. Not sure what that means, but sounded ominous. This was concerning. Helen's social connections extended throughout Charleston's business and social circles. While her influence had limits, as demonstrated by her failed attempt to undermine me at Meridian, she still had considerable capacity to create complications if properly motivated. I texted back, "Any specifics on what kind of favors or who she's contacting?" "Nothing concrete," David replied. "But she mentioned board memberships and country club connections. She seems fixated on the idea that you've stolen family property and need to be taught a lesson." The language was revealing, entitled and punitive. Helen wasn't approaching this as a business matter to be resolved through proper channels, but as a personal affront requiring correction. Her worldview couldn't accommodate the reality that I held legitimate financial power in this situation. I thanked David again and made a mental note to alert Irwin tomorrow. If Helen was mobilizing her social network against me, we might need to prepare for unconventional attacks beyond the standard legal process. My phone rang just as I was preparing for bed. Michael's number. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. "Olivia." His voice sounded different, tense, almost whispering. "I need to talk to you." "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "Not on the phone. Can we meet? Tomorrow morning, before work?" The urgency in his tone gave me pause. "What's this about, Michael?" "Mom's." He hesitated. "Mom's doing something I think you should know about. Something I can't support. Please, Liv. 20 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Despite my reservations, curiosity won out. "Early Bird Cafe, 7 a.m., I suggested, naming a place downtown, conveniently public and on my way to the office. "Thank you," he said, sounding genuinely relieved. "And Liv, don't tell anyone we're meeting." After he hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, turning the conversation over in my mind. Michael had never gone against his mother's wishes in any significant way. For him to reach out secretly, to express disagreement with Helen's actions, something fundamental had shifted. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, selecting a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. Michael arrived precisely at 7, looking haggard and sleep-deprived. He ordered coffee but left it untouched on the table between us. "Mom's trying to get you fired," he said without preamble, his voice low despite the relative privacy of our corner. "She's contacting everyone she knows on Meridian's board, calling in favors, trying to create doubts about your professional ethics." I'd suspected something along these lines from David's text, but hearing it confirmed still sent a chill through me. On what grounds? She's suggesting you've used your position to build a shadow empire of personal investments that conflict with Meridian's interests. That the Blackwood mortgage is just one example of your pattern of leveraging insider information for personal gain. The allegation was absurd given my meticulously documented disclosures, but mudslinging didn't require factual basis to cause damage, especially coming from someone with Helen's social standing. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, studying Michael's face. "You've supported your mother's position until now." He looked down at his untouched coffee. "There are lines, Liv. What happened at Christmas? I went along with it because I was confused and hurt about how things had changed between us. But trying to destroy your career? That's not right." It was the first glimpse of the Michael I'd fallen in love with, the man with his own moral compass, separate from his mother's influence. I wasn't sure whether to feel encouraged or saddened that it had taken such extreme circumstances to resurface that aspect of his character. "Thank you for the warning," I said sincerely. "I appreciate you telling me, especially knowing your mother wouldn't approve." "She wouldn't just disapprove," he admitted. "She'd see it as betrayal. That's why I asked to meet in person, away from the house. She checks my phone regularly now, has been since Christmas." The revelation stunned me. "She checks your phone? Michael, you're 42 years old." "I know how it sounds," he said, a flush creeping up his neck. "After you left, I was struggling. Mom stepped in to help manage the transition, as she put it. At first, it seemed easier to just go along with her suggestions. Then it became harder to say no. The dynamic he described was so unhealthy, so infantilizing, that I momentarily forgot my own grievances in concern for him. "That's not normal. Michael, that's controlling behavior." He nodded slowly. "I'm starting to see that. When Dad made the partial mortgage payment against Mom's wishes, she had a complete meltdown, screaming, threatening to disown him, saying he'd chosen you over family loyalty. It was like watching someone I didn't recognize." "And that's when you decided to warn me about her plans," I surmised. "Yes." He finally took a sip of his cooling coffee. "But there's more. She's not just targeting your job. She's going after your reputation in the community. Calling friends at the country club, the historical society, the Chamber of Commerce, anywhere you might have professional or social connections. She's determined to make Charleston inhospitable for you." The vindictiveness of Helen's campaign was breathtaking. Not content with ejecting me from the family, she now sought to drive me from the entire community, to erase my existence beyond the boundaries of her control. "Why?" I asked, genuinely puzzled by the escalation. "Why take it this far? The divorce is proceeding. I'm out of your family's daily life. What more does she want?" Michael's expression turned grim. "Control. Mom can't stand that you have power over the family home through the mortgage. It contradicts everything she believes about natural hierarchies. Who should have authority over whom? In her mind, your position threatens the entire social order she's built her identity around." His insight was surprisingly perceptive, more than I would have expected given his traditional deference to his mother's worldview. "And you?" I asked. "What do you believe about these natural hierarchies?" He met my gaze directly for perhaps the first time since Christmas. "I don't know anymore. Everything I thought was solid wasn't. Everything I took for granted wasn't, including us." The admission held more honesty than anything he'd said in months. Not a declaration of changed feelings or renewed understanding, but an acknowledgement of uncertainty, the first step toward genuine reflection. "Thank you for the warning," I said again. "I'll take appropriate precautions." As we prepared to leave, Michael hesitated. "What will you do about Mom's campaign?" "What I've always done," I replied. "Prepare thoroughly, document everything, and focus on facts rather than emotions." The difference is that now I understand what I'm actually dealing with." He nodded, a flicker of the admiration I'd once seen regularly in his eyes briefly visible. "You'll be okay. You always land on your feet." "I do," I agreed, "because I never expected anyone else to catch me if I fell." As I walked to my office after our meeting, I felt a curious sense of lightness despite the concerning information Michael had shared. Helen's escalation was potentially damaging, but it also represented a critical strategic error. She was bringing private family grievances into professional spheres where her social influence was counterbalanced by business ethics and regulatory frameworks. In family settings, Helen's authority had been unquestioned for decades. But in corporate boardrooms and financial institutions, different rules applied. Rules I understood intimately from both professional training and personal experience navigating systems designed to exclude people like me from backgrounds like mine. Helen believed her social connections would override those systems on her behalf. I knew better, and that knowledge was power, the kind that couldn't be inherited or conferred through marriage. The kind I'd earned through persistence, intelligence, and the resilience forged in circumstances Helen had spent a lifetime avoiding. I reached my office and immediately called Erwin to brief him on Helen's escalation. Together, we would prepare for whatever storm Helen Blackwood thought she was about to unleash. Whatever came next, I would face it not as Michael's rejected wife or Helen's dismissed daughter-in-law, but as exactly who I'd always been beneath those temporary labels. A woman who knew how to transform obstacles into opportunities, limitations, into leverage, and underestimation into advantage. Erwin and I spent the next 2 hours developing a preemptive strategy against Helen's campaign. His decades of experience navigating Charleston's social hierarchies proved invaluable as we mapped out potential vulnerabilities and fortifications. "I recommend full transparency with Edward Manning and the board," Erwin advised, referring to Meridian Financial's CEO and leadership. "Present them with the complete timeline, from your acquisition of the Blackwood mortgage to the current situation. Include all documentation of your disclosures and compliance with company policies." "Agreed," I said, already mentally organizing the presentation. "I'll request a meeting with Edward this afternoon. Also, document any unusual contacts or inquiries about your professional conduct," Erwin continued. "If Helen is activating her social network against you, there will be traces. People making discreet inquiries, sudden interest in your investment activities, perhaps even rumors circulating at business functions." As if on cue, my assistant knocked at the door. "Ms. Reynolds, there's a Mr. Harrington from the Chamber of Commerce on line 2. Says it's regarding your speaking engagement next month." I exchanged glances with Erwin. George Harrington was a longtime associate of Thomas Blackwood and sat on several boards with Helen. His sudden call about an already confirmed event seemed suspiciously well-timed. "I'll take it," I told my assistant, then turned to Erwin. "Let's see if Helen's campaign has already begun." Erwin nodded and moved to leave, but I gestured for him to stay and activated the speakerphone. "George, good morning. What can I do for you regarding the economic forecast?" "Presentation? Olivia, hello." His voice carried the practiced smoothness of someone uncomfortable with their own message. "Just a bit of, scheduling business to discuss. The committee was wondering if you might consider allowing someone else from Meridian to deliver the address. We understand you've had some personal challenges recently and thought you might appreciate the reprieve." The thinly veiled attempt to sideline me was so transparent, I almost laughed. The Chamber's annual economic forecast was a prestigious speaking opportunity, one that boosted visibility for both the speaker and their institution. Being removed would be a public demotion, exactly what Helen would want. "How thoughtful," I replied, keeping my tone warm and professional. "But I'm actually finding work to be a welcome focus during this transitional time." Meridian's leadership specifically requested I maintain all professional engagements, particularly high-visibility ones like the chamber address. I see. Harrington sounded disconcerted by my lack of cooperation. Well, there have been some. Concerns expressed about potential conflicts between your personal situation and your professional role. Concerns from whom, specifically? I asked, though we both knew the answer. I'm not at liberty to say, he hedged. But as you know, the chamber takes its reputation for integrity very seriously. As does Meridian Financial, I countered. Smoothly. Which is why all my personal investments, including Coastal Peninsula Investments, LLC, are fully disclosed and regularly reviewed by our compliance department. I'd be happy to provide documentation of those disclosures if the chamber has specific questions. The mention of documentation shifted his tone immediately. That won't be necessary. I'm sure everything is in order. I appreciate that confidence, I said. Will there be anything else regarding the February presentation? I've already submitted the outline and slides as requested. No, that's all, he backpedaled. Looking forward to seeing you there. After ending the call, I looked at Erwin, whose expression confirmed my assessment. First contact, he said dryly. Helen's moving quickly. And predictably, I added. The chamber presentation is exactly the kind of professional visibility she'd target first. High profile, but without formal employment protections. She'll escalate from here, Erwin warned. The country club board, charitable organizations, anywhere you have connections that rely on social capital rather than contractual obligations. Then we continue with our transparency strategy, I decided. I'll reach out proactively to any organization where I hold positions that might be vulnerable to Helen's influence. By the end of the day, I had secured a meeting with Edward Manning for the following morning, drafted a comprehensive disclosure document outlining the entire Blackwood mortgage situation, and initiated contact with the 3 nonprofit boards, where I held positions. Each communication followed the same template: acknowledgement of my ongoing divorce, confirmation that all my professional activities and disclosures remained in full compliance with organizational policies, and an offer to address any specific concerns that might arise. The preemptive approach seemed to be working. 2 of the nonprofit directors responded immediately with messages of support, while the third, a historical preservation society where Helen held significant influence, sent a politely non-committal reply that suggested further discussion might be needed. As I was preparing to leave the office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected source. James Blackwood, Michael's cousin who worked at Charleston First Bank. Heads up, Helen just had lunch with our bank president. Your name? Came up repeatedly. Don't know specifics, but thought you should know. I thanked him for the information, surprised by yet another crack in the Blackwood family's united front. James had always been friendly but distant, clearly deferring to Helen's authority in family matters. His willingness to warn me suggested the family dynamics were shifting in ways even Helen might not fully realize. My meeting with Edward Manning the next morning went better than expected. I presented the complete timeline of events, supported by meticulous documentation of all disclosures and compliance reviews. Edward listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions but otherwise allowing me to present the full picture without interruption. Let me get this straight, he said when I'd finished. You created a holding company that purchased the Blackwood family's distressed mortgage, saving them from foreclosure. You disclosed this investment fully to our compliance department. You maintained appropriate separation between this personal investment and your professional responsibilities at Meridian. And now, because you're divorcing their son, the Blackwoods, have decided this perfectly legitimate transaction represents some kind of ethical breach? That's an accurate summary, I confirmed. And Helen Blackwood is now contacting Meridian board members suggesting we should reconsider your position as CFO based on this alleged conflict. According to reliable sources, yes. Edward leaned Back in his chair, his expression a mixture of annoyance and something resembling admiration. "You know, when we promoted you to CFO, there were a few old guard board members who questioned whether you had the, quote, right background for the position. I remember thinking at the time that they weren't seeing the full picture, that your background was precisely what made you valuable to Meridian." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "The financial sector is full of people who understand money from only one perspective, having it," he went on. "Your journey from scholarship student to CFO gives you insights most of our competitors lack. You understand financial vulnerability as well as financial power. That dual perspective informs your risk assessments, your client recommendations, your strategic planning." "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by his assessment. "I've always tried to view that perspective as an asset rather than a liability." "It is an asset," Edward confirmed, "and apparently one that Helen Blackwood fundamentally misunderstands." He reached for his phone. "Janet, please schedule a brief call with each board member today. Topic is a preemptive clarification regarding our CFO's personal investments. And add Helen Blackwood to the restricted contact list for all executive offices." After ending the call, he turned back to me. "Consider the professional front secured. Meridian stands behind you fully. If any board member has questions after reviewing the documentation you've provided, they can address them to me directly." I left his office feeling a profound sense of validation. Edward hadn't just dismissed Helen's allegations, he had recognized and affirmed the very background the Blackwoods had consistently treated as a liability. The scholarship student from East Charleston wasn't just tolerated at Meridian, she was valued precisely because of her journey, not despite it. The rest of the week brought a series of small skirmishes as Helen's campaign unfolded across Charleston's social landscape. I received a coolly worded email from the country club's membership committee regarding concerns about recent changes in my domestic situation. The Junior League suddenly reconsidered my invitation to chair their annual charity auction. 3 separate business associates called with transparently flimsy reasons to confirm upcoming meetings, clearly checking whether I remained in good professional standing. Each attempt at social or professional isolation was met with my prepared response: transparency, documentation, and calm professionalism. By Friday, a new pattern had emerged in the responses I received, a subtle but perceptible shift from cautious distance to careful neutrality. Helen's campaign wasn't gaining the traction she had anticipated. Charleston's social hierarchy might respect the Blackwood family's historical position, but business leaders respected quantifiable results and clear documentation. Helen's whisper campaign relied on innuendo and social pressure. My response offered concrete evidence and professional integrity. In a contest between those approaches, the outcome was increasingly predictable. The mortgage situation continued to develop along similar lines. The second half of January's payment remained outstanding, despite the formal notice from Coastal Peninsula Investments. According to David's insider reports, Helen remained convinced that the mortgage notices were negotiating tactics rather than standard business procedures, a fundamental misunderstanding that Thomas had been unable to correct despite increasingly urgent attempts. On February 10th, the formal default notification was automatically generated and sent to the Blackwood residence. Within hours, my phone lit up with a call from Helen herself, the first direct contact since Christmas dinner. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided direct engagement might actually be more productive at this stage. "Hello, Helen. This has gone far enough," she began without preamble, her voice tight with controlled fury. "This harassment regarding our home mortgage needs to stop immediately." "There's no harassment, Helen," I replied calmly. "The notification you received is standard procedure when payments are more than 30 days overdue. It's an automated system, not a personal action on my part." "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "We both know what you're doing. Using financial manipulation to punish our family because your feelings were hurt at Christmas? The characterization was so divorced from reality that I momentarily struggled to formulate a response. This isn't about hurt feelings. It's about a legally binding financial obligation that your family has chosen not to fulfill. The consequences of that choice are standard banking procedures, not personal punishment. We are not some delinquent borrowers, Helen said, the words seeming to physically pain her. The Blackwoods have been pillars of this community for generations. Our word has always been our bond. Then I suggest honoring that tradition by paying the outstanding mortgage balance, I replied simply. That would resolve the situation immediately. She made a sound somewhere between a scoff and a laugh. You really think it's that simple? That you can force our family into submission through financial pressure? You have no idea who you're dealing with, Olivia. No idea at all. I understand exactly who I'm dealing with, I countered, keeping my voice level despite her escalating tone. I'm dealing with borrowers who signed a legally binding mortgage agreement, received all the benefits of that agreement for 3 years, and are now attempting to evade their payment obligations. From a business perspective, it's actually very straightforward. Business perspective, she repeated with undisguised contempt. Always hiding behind numbers and contracts, aren't you? Never able to understand the human elements that matter to real families. The irony of Helen Blackwood lecturing anyone about human elements or real families was almost too much to bear. But I maintained my professional demeanor. The human element I understand perfectly is responsibility. Your family accepted a financial responsibility when they signed the mortgage agreement. I'm simply expecting that responsibility to be honored. This conversation is pointless, Helen declared. I'll be speaking with your superiors at Meridian about this ongoing harassment. You're welcome to do so, I replied, unable to resist. Adding, though I believe you'll find Edward Manning remarkably unreceptive to your concerns. The slight intake of breath on the other end of the line told me Helen had already discovered the limitations of her influence at Meridian. This isn't over, she said finally. Not by a long shot. After she hung up, I sat at my desk, turning the conversation over in my mind. Helen's position had shifted subtly, from outright denial of the mortgage obligation to indignation at being treated like delinquent borrowers. The progress was minimal but significant. Reality was beginning to penetrate her carefully constructed narrative, if only around the edges. Late that afternoon, I received notification that a payment had been received. The remaining balance for January plus the full February payment, accompanied by a terse note from Thomas Blackwood requesting confirmation that the account was now current. I instructed the accounting service to process the payment and send the requested confirmation. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Thank you for your patience with this matter. I apologize for the complications. The message caught me off guard. In 15 years of knowing Thomas Blackwood, I'd never once heard him apologize for anything, not even when his failed investments had nearly cost them the family home. That he would do so now, over a matter Helen clearly considered a battle line, suggested a significant shift in the family's internal dynamics. I replied with professional courtesy. Payment received and processed. The account is now current. Thank you for resolving the matter. That evening, as I was reviewing design options for my new apartment's bathroom renovation, my doorbell rang. Unexpectedly. Looking through the peephole, I was startled to see Elizabeth Blackwood, Thomas's sister and Helen's sometime ally, standing in the hallway. I opened the door cautiously. Elizabeth, this is unexpected. May I come in? She asked, glancing nervously down the hallway as if worried about being seen. I won't take much of your time. I hesitated, weighing the potential risks against my curiosity, then stepped aside to let her enter. My apartment was still in transition, half-unpacked boxes alongside new furniture, the walls bare where wedding photos and Blackwood family heirlooms had once hung. Elizabeth surveyed the space with frank interest. "So this is where you've landed. It's different from what I expected." "What did you expect?" I asked, gesturing for her to take a seat on the new sofa that had been delivered just days earlier. "Something sadder, I suppose," she admitted, settling onto the edge of the cushion. "Helen has been painting quite a picture of your downfall, as she calls it. This doesn't look like downfall to me. It looks like fresh start." "That's exactly what it is," I confirmed, taking the chair opposite her. "Now, what brings you here, Elizabeth? I doubt Helen knows about this visit." She gave a short, humorless laugh. Helen would have an aneurysm if she knew I was here. But I've watched this situation deteriorate long enough. Thomas made the mortgage payment today. "I know. I received confirmation." "Helen doesn't know." "Yet?" Elizabeth continued, lowering her voice despite the privacy of my apartment. "Thomas liquidated some personal investments to cover it without telling her. He's finally standing up to her, and it's causing significant tension in the household." This was unexpected information. Thomas acting independently of Helen's directives represented a seismic shift in the family power structure. "I appreciate the update, but I'm not sure why you're sharing this with me." Elizabeth leaned forward, her expression suddenly earnest. "Because you need to understand what you're actually dealing with. This isn't just about a mortgage or a divorce anymore. It's about Helen's control over the entire family, which is slipping for the first time in decades. That makes her desperate, and desperate people take desperate actions." "What kind of actions are you concerned about?" I asked, a chill running through me despite the apartment's comfortable temperature. "I don't know specifics," Elizabeth admitted, "but Helen had a private meeting with Harold Ferguson yesterday that lasted over 2 hours. The name immediately raised red flags. Harold Ferguson was a notorious power broker in Charleston's business community, a man who operated in the shadows between legitimate business and questionable practices. His specialty was solving delicate problems for wealthy families, often through methods that skirted ethical and sometimes legal boundaries. "That's concerning," I acknowledged. "Has she ever consulted Ferguson before?" "Never," Elizabeth confirmed. "The family has always kept a careful distance from him publicly, though Thomas has occasionally used his services for business matters. The fact that Helen would meet with him directly in public suggests she's moving beyond her usual tactics." I processed this information carefully. "Thank you for the warning, Elizabeth. May I ask why you're helping me? We've never been particularly close." She was silent for a moment, seeming to consider her words carefully. "I've watched Helen run this family like her personal fiefdom for 30 years. I've seen how she isolates anyone who challenges her authority. Family members, friends, business associates. I stood by silently when she did it to you at Christmas because standing by silently is what we all do when Helen decides someone is no longer useful to her vision of what the Blackwoods should be." Elizabeth straightened her shoulders, meeting my gaze directly. "But something changed when Thomas defied her on the mortgage payment. He finally said what many of us have thought for years, that her obsession with control is destroying the very family she claims to protect. And for the first time, others are beginning to agree with him openly." The revelation was stunning. Not just that Thomas had defied Helen, but that others in the family were supporting his stance. The monolithic family front I'd faced at Christmas, dinner was fracturing from within. "What do you think I should do with this information?" I asked Elizabeth, genuinely uncertain how to proceed. "Be careful," she advised simply. "Harold Ferguson doesn't operate within the usual social constraints. Whatever Helen has asked him to do, it won't be limited by the considerations that have governed your interactions with the family so far." After Elizabeth left, I immediately called Erwin to brief him on this new development. His response was measured but concerned. "Ferguson's involvement changes the calculation," he agreed. Until now, we've been dealing with social and professional maneuvers, uncomfortable, but relatively straightforward to counter. Ferguson operates differently. What do you recommend? I asked, pacing my living room as twilight settled over Charleston. Enhanced security measures for one, Irwin suggested. Not panic, but prudence. Have your building's security system checked for vulnerabilities. Review your digital security protocols. Consider having your vehicles inspected for tampering. The precautions sounded extreme, but Irwin's tone convinced me to take them seriously. And professionally? Accelerate any critical projects at Meridian, he advised. If Ferguson is investigating you for Helen, he'll be looking for vulnerabilities, deals that could be delayed or disrupted, presentations that could be undermined, anything that might create professional embarrassment or damage. I thought immediately of the Singapore project, the international expansion that represented both Meridian's future growth and my own professional visibility. I'll speak with Edward about expediting the timeline. Good, Irwin said. And, Olivia, document everything. Every unusual contact, every system glitch, every unexpected roadblock. If Ferguson is involved, there will be patterns, subtle but discernible to someone who knows what to look for. After ending the call, I stood at my apartment window, looking out at the Charleston skyline illuminated against the night sky. The city I'd called home for 20 years suddenly felt like unfamiliar territory, a battlefield where the rules of engagement had shifted without warning. Yet strangely, I wasn't afraid. Concerned, yes. Vigilant, certainly. But not afraid. The woman who had walked out of the Blackwood house on Christmas night had been blindsided by betrayal, unprepared for the sudden collapse of her carefully constructed life. The woman standing at this window 2 months later was different. Clear-eyed, strategic, and remarkably adaptable. Helen's escalation through Ferguson represented a critical acknowledgement. Her traditional methods of social control had failed against me. My professional standing remained secure. My financial position was solid. My reputation had weathered. Her attacks, where her usual tactics of isolation and intimidation had succeeded countless times before, they had broken against my preparation and resilience like waves against stone. So she had resorted to Ferguson, a nuclear option that revealed not strength but desperation, and desperate moves, while dangerous, were also revealing. They exposed fundamental insecurities, showed where true vulnerabilities lay. Helen believed she was escalating the conflict, but in reality she was confirming what I had begun to suspect since Christmas. Her power derived primarily from others, willingness to accommodate her demands, to avoid conflict at any cost. When that accommodation was withdrawn, as Thomas had done with the mortgage payment, her control began to crumble. The realization was both enlightening and empowering. Helen Blackwood wasn't an omnipotent force who could exile me from Charleston's professional and social circles on a whim. She was simply a woman who had spent decades cultivating an image of authority that was now being challenged from multiple directions, including from within her own family. Ferguson complicated matters. Certainly, his involvement introduced unpredictable elements that would require vigilance and preparation. But it also signaled that the conventional phase of this conflict was ending. What came next would determine not just my place in Charleston, but the future of the Blackwood family itself. As I turned from the window to continue unpacking my new life, box by careful box, I felt a surprising emotion rising within me. Not anger or anxiety, but a steady, calm determination. Helen had escalated because she was losing, and I had no intention of allowing that trend to reverse. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of professional commitments and heightened vigilance. Following Irwin's advice, I enhanced my security measures, having my apartment systems checked, implementing additional digital protections, and varying my daily routines. The Singapore project accelerated, with Edward Manning fully supporting my recommendation to move the presentation timeline forward. Signs of Harold Ferguson's involvement emerged gradually, subtle but unmistakable patterns that might have gone unnoticed if I hadn't been specifically watching for them. My home and office emails experienced unexplained delays. The security system at my apartment registered attempts to access the building's central controls. A colleague mentioned that a stranger had been asking detailed questions about my travel schedule at a business function. I documented each incident meticulously, sharing the growing file with Erwin and Edward. Neither seemed surprised by the developments. Ferguson's standard playbook, Erwin observed during our weekly update. Information gathering phase. He's looking for vulnerabilities, pressure points, anything that might be leveraged. To what end? I asked. What exactly is Helen hoping to accomplish through him? Based on his typical patterns, I'd say she's looking for something that would force you to relinquish control of the mortgage, Erwin surmised. Financial irregularities, professional missteps, personal indiscretions. Anything that would create sufficient pressure for you to surrender the leverage you hold. The assessment matched my own analysis. Helen couldn't accept that I legitimately controlled a key piece of the Blackwood family's financial stability. Her worldview required that power to be returned to its proper place, under family control. The problem for Ferguson, Edward added, is that he's not finding what Helen expects him to find. Your professional record is impeccable. Your financial dealings are transparent and properly documented. You don't have the kind of skeletons in your closet that his tactics usually uncover. Everyone has vulnerabilities, I noted, practical despite the vote of confidence. Of course, Erwin agreed, but yours aren't where Helen assumes they would be. She's operating from a flawed understanding of who you are and what motivates you. That flawed understanding had defined my relationship with the Blackwoods from the beginning. They had consistently viewed me through the lens of their own preconceptions. The scholarship student seeking social elevation through marriage, the career woman who would eventually surrender to family priorities, the outsider who could be tolerated as long as she remained appropriately deferential. Not once in 15 years had they recognized the truth that was now becoming unavoidably clear. I had never needed their acceptance or approval. I had built my life and career on my own terms, independent of their social scaffolding. The power I now held wasn't stolen or manipulated. It was earned through competence and foresight they had consistently undervalued. The culmination came more suddenly than I anticipated. On a Wednesday morning in late February, I arrived at my office to find a plain manila envelope on my desk, not mailed, not sent through interoffice channels, but hand-delivered somehow, despite building security protocols. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address, date, and time. The Charleston Club, Friday, 7 p.m. Below that, a handwritten note. Final resolution of the Blackwood matter. Principals only. I recognized the handwriting immediately, Helen's distinctive cursive, taught in the same exclusive finishing schools her female ancestors had attended for generations. The Charleston Club was the city's oldest and most traditional private social club, where Helen held significant influence through family legacy memberships. I called Erwin immediately. Helen's making her move, I explained, describing the mysterious invitation. The Charleston Club this Friday. Interesting venue choice, he observed. Traditional territory where she believes she holds maximum advantage. The principal's only stipulation suggests she wants to isolate you from legal representation. Should I accept? I asked, though I already knew my decision. That depends on what you want from this endgame, Erwin replied thoughtfully. If your goal is simply to maintain professional distance while the divorce proceeds, declining might be prudent. But if you're seeking a more definitive resolution to the Blackwood situation, I confirmed. This needs to end. Cleanly. And completely. Then yes, I think you should attend, but not without preparation. Over the next 48 hours, Erwin and I developed a comprehensive strategy for the meeting. We couldn't know exactly what Helen had planned, but we could anticipate likely scenarios and prepare accordingly. I spent hours reviewing documentation, practicing potential responses, and preparing mentally for whatever confrontation awaited. Friday evening arrived with uncharacteristic clarity for February in Charleston, the air crisp and clean, the sky deepening to indigo as I approached the Charleston Club's imposing Georgian facade. The doorman recognized me immediately, suggesting I was expected, and directed me to the Palmetto Room on the second floor. I climbed the grand staircase slowly, taking in the portraits of prominent Charleston families that lined the walls, including several generations of Blackwoods, their stern expressions seeming to judge my presence in this sanctified space. At the top of the stairs, I paused briefly to center myself before proceeding down the hallway to what I suspected would be the final act in this prolonged drama. The Palmetto Room door was closed. I knocked once, then entered without waiting for a response, a small but deliberate assertion of confidence. Inside, seated around a mahogany conference table that had probably witnessed a century of Charleston power negotiations, sat Helen and Thomas Blackwood, Michael, and a silver-haired man I recognized immediately as Harold Ferguson. His reputation for ruthless problem-solving was reflected in cold eyes that assessed me with clinical detachment. "Olivia," Helen greeted me with artificial warmth. "Thank you for joining us. I believe you know everyone except Mr. Ferguson, a family advisor who's been helping us navigate this unfortunate situation." "We haven't met formally," I acknowledged, meeting Ferguson's calculating gaze directly. "Though I'm familiar with Mr. Ferguson's reputation in certain circles." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, perhaps at my direct acknowledgement of his role, or perhaps at my composure in this carefully orchestrated scenario. "Please, sit down," Helen continued, gesturing to the single chair positioned to face all four of them, an obvious attempt at psychological intimidation through physical positioning. Instead of taking the indicated seat, I deliberately chose one at the head of the table, traditionally the power position in such settings. "I believe this arrangement will facilitate more productive conversation," I said calmly, opening my portfolio on the table before me. Helen's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly, but she recovered quickly. "As you wish. We've asked you here to present a final resolution to our ongoing disagreements, one that will allow all parties to move forward with dignity." "I'm listening," I replied, maintaining a neutral expression despite the presumptuous framing of the meeting. Helen nodded to Ferguson, who opened a leather folder and extracted a document set. "Ms. Reynolds," he began, his voice carrying the polished smoothness of expensive legal training. "After extensive review of the circumstances surrounding your acquisition of the Blackwood family mortgage, we believe we've identified several areas of concern that merit immediate attention." "Concerns such as?" I prompted when he paused dramatically. "Questions regarding the timing of your acquisition, potential use of insider information, and possible violations of banking regulations," Ferguson continued, sliding the document across the table. "This analysis details the specific issues that could present significant problems for your career if formally investigated." I glanced at the document without touching it, immediately recognizing the strategy. Implied threats of regulatory investigation, regardless of merit, could create professional complications even if ultimately dismissed. It was a classic pressure tactic, creating the specter of protracted legal entanglement to force a disadvantageous settlement. "Before we continue," I said evenly, "I'd like to clarify something. Is this meeting an attempt at blackmail, Mr. Ferguson?" The blunt question landed like a stone in still water, creating visible ripples of discomfort around the table. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Michael looked down at his hands. Even Ferguson seemed momentarily taken aback by my directness. Helen, however, remained unfazed. "Don't be melodramatic, Olivia. This is a good faith attempt to resolve a complex situation with minimal public disruption. We're simply highlighting potential consequences of your current position. My current position being the legal holder of your family home mortgage, I clarified. A position secured through fully documented, entirely legal financial transactions conducted 3 years ago. Transactions that saved your home from foreclosure due to Thomas's investment mistakes. Thomas flinched visibly at the direct reference to his financial failures, a subject the Blackwoods had carefully avoided discussing openly even within the family. Ancient history, Helen dismissed with a wave of her hand. What matters now is finding a path forward that serves everyone's interests. And the path you've identified involves implied threats of baseless regulatory investigations, I noted. Interesting approach. Ferguson leaned forward slightly. Ms. Reynolds, regardless of how you characterize our concerns, the fact remains that prolonged scrutiny of your financial activities would be uncomfortable. We're offering a clean alternative. Transfer the mortgage back to Citizens Bank at the original acquisition price, and all parties agree to move forward without further conflict. It was precisely the outcome Irwin had predicted, demanding, I surrender the mortgage without the appreciation or interest it had accumulated over 3 years, effectively erasing both my investment growth and the financial service I'd provided the Blackwoods. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.